If you feel like you're dealing with a Candida problem, or maybe even SIfO, which is a small intestinal fungal overgrowth, in this video I'm going to help you understand the most common underlying causes that can create this scenario and some steps you can take to turn the situation around. And if you've been researching this at all, the dietary topics I think just might freak you out a little bit.
TC Hale is not a doctor and does not claim to be a doctor or licensed in any type of medical field. Don't be an idiot and use anything heard on the show as medical advice. This information should be used for educational purposes only, and you should contact your doctor for any medical advice. Now get off me.
Candida is basically a yeast issue, and most healthy people have Candida in their mouth or digestive tract or vagina, and it can be just okay. It's not going to cause a lot of trouble unless it creates an overgrowth type issue. And we really don't want to see an overgrowth here in the small intestine or even in this large intestine either. But the reality is that most individuals' gut flora here in the large intestine consists of both bacteria and yeast. And Candida is one of those yeasts that is in most people. You know, when you do like stool tests and such, most people are going to show some Candida in their stool, and it's not going to be creating any trouble because it's not out of control. It kind of seems like the bacteria and the yeast kind of keep each other in check and keep each other from going out of control and creating all kinds of havoc. And one concern is there doesn't seem to be a great way to really know, is a person dealing with a SIfO problem or not. The stool tests that most people do just don't seem to be that conclusive. For one reason is that most people are going to show some Candida in their stool. And the other reason is that the tests just don't seem to be very reliable. I've talked to other experts on my podcast that have told me, yeah, we took a stool sample from somebody and we sent it to 3 different labs and we got 3 different results, totally contradicting each other. So we're just not so sure that these tests are so successful, but we'll talk about some ways to get an idea of what may be going on here in just a little bit. But some issues that seem to be very causative for this situation are situations like stress in the body, since stress can kind of down-regulate the immune system. Acid-lowering medications seem to be a problem. We'll talk about that in a second. Antibiotics, because when you take antibiotics, you're going to wipe out all the bacteria in that digestive tract. And the bacteria, in a lot of cases, is what keeps those fungus and yeast and mold in check and keep that Candida from really thriving. So if you wipe everything out, that seems to be problematic. High carb or processed food diets, and things like alcohol and smoking that are really just restricting the body from functioning the way that it should really function. And unfortunately, with a Candida SIfO type situation, the symptoms can be some of our biggest markers and the most common situations that somebody's going to deal with. And they don't have to be dealing with all these. Most people don't deal with all of them. But the ones that most commonly show up are things like burping and bloating and abdominal pain, maybe some constipation or indigestion or loss of appetite or diarrhea or acid reflux or even malabsorption type symptoms. All of those things that are very common when somebody's dealing with a SIfO or some type of overgrowth in the small intestine or even the large intestine. But if somebody's having a significant SIfO type issue, we really want to reduce that overgrowth. And a great way to do that are using some natural antimicrobial agents. GSE, which is grapefruit seed extract, is one of my favorites, and that seems to work very effectively when you're dealing with yeast type issues. And a lot of clients I've seen take, well, they'll just put a few drops in some water and maybe swish it around their mouth if they feel like they have a Candida issue in their mouth. But you can also drink it and swallow it and consume it. And they also sell like gel caps that you can take. I don't see that these are as effective as using the actual liquid, but I've heard from clients that when they want to do a bigger dose, they'll actually like fill an empty capsule with this GSE and then take it that way, because a large amount of drops in water can get a little bit yucky. It's not the most delicious stuff. Garlic seems to be very effective. Things like oregano and black walnut and caprylic acid have all shown to create good results. And for most people, they're not usually going to be able to just use one thing and, oh, that did it. Man, 3 days, I knocked it all out. This is going to take some effort to really get under control. But we'll put some links in the description below to some studies that show that, you know, things like garlic have shown to be as effective as some of the antifungal medications that some people use. So we see some success using these types of situations. So step number 1 can just be to bring things down a few levels. And step number 2 is to shut the front door. You know, when we talked over here about how there seems to be a correlation between the use of acid-reducing medications and these SIfO Candida type issues, well, this stomach acid here is not just there to help us acidify the food so that we can break that food down and get all the nutrients out of that food. That's a very important component. But it's also there as the barrier to this whole digestive tract. As varmints come in on the food that we're eating, they're supposed to die in an acid bath. But if we're taking a medication that turns off that stomach acid, then that stomach acid barrier is not there. Now the front door is open and everybody comes in and is like, oh, this is nice. Let's set up camp here and let's move down here in the small intestine and create some type of overgrowth there. And man, we might even move into the large intestine too. This is going to be great. So that can be very problematic. And for a lot of people, they cannot be making enough stomach acid even without taking an acid-reducing medication. There's a wide variety of reasons that a person may not be making enough stomach acid. So when we're looking at the SIfO or SIBO, which is a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, when we're looking at those type issues, in most cases, the person's not making enough stomach acid, and that's how the issue got in the first place. And when we're looking at a fungal or yeast type overgrowth, in most cases, it's going to be both. When the environment is set up to where one of these types of organisms can thrive, it's awesome that other types of organisms are thriving as well. But a person might take, oh, I got SIBO, I'm going to wipe out all this bacteria. They'll take steps to be very aggressive against bacteria, but they don't do anything to take care of the fungal issue as well. So a lot of times if I have a client that's really having significant symptoms that seem to be coming from some type of overgrowth, I'll have them take steps to wipe out both, to reduce both issues, to kind of get things under control so these other steps we talk about in a minute will be more beneficial. And when you look at some of these natural antimicrobials, a lot of them are good to use against bacteria as well. But when we're looking at shutting this front door, digestive malfunction is very common. And if someone isn't making enough stomach acid, not only are their inability to break down their food is there, but they also can't kill the bad guys. And another thing is, once this food is acidified correctly, it moves down into the duodenum, which is like the first 10 inches of the small intestine. And the acid product going to the duodenum triggers this gallbladder to squirt alkaline bile down. Now, a lot of pathogens won't do well in an acidic environment, and a lot of them won't do well in an alkaline environment. Now, a lot of pathogens won't make it through this acidic environment here in the stomach, but the ones that do come down here, and then when this alkaline bile comes down, they get fried in that alkalinity. And also when this acidic product from the stomach meets this alkaline bile from the gallbladder, these opposite pHs colliding creates like this sizzle that really helps us bust the food apart and get all the nutrients out of that food. And I sometimes wonder if it's that reaction, that chemical reaction of the opposite pHs, if it's also helping to wipe out any of these pathogens that may have gotten through this stomach acid function. So we really want both of these functions working correctly. And just like it's very common for someone not to be making enough stomach acid, it's very common for someone's bile to become too thick and sticky to flow correctly. And then it's not going to come down here and neutralize the acids and help wipe out those pathogens. So if you're not sure if that's a problem for you, we'll put a link in the description below this video for our video on 10 signs of poor bile flow, so you can check that out and see if that might be something that you need to work on. But if a person is not making enough stomach acid, we see them do things like maybe apple cider vinegar or some betaine HCl. And apple cider vinegar is nice. It can give a person a little bit of a boost. But for most people, they're going to need to use betaine HCl to really acidify that stomach. And if you need to understand how to do those things, my book, Kick Your Fat in the Nuts, chapters 3 and 4, walk you through figuring out which aspects of digestion may not be working correctly and what steps you can take to help improve those scenarios. And the book is available on Amazon, but I'll put a link in the description below so you can get the whole thing totally for free, and that'll just kind of walk you through that process. So those are very important. Acid function, bile flow. You need both things working correctly so you can shut the front door. A lot of this stuff is going to take effort to really wipe out all these bad guys and get them under control. But if you don't shut the door, they're going to come right back in next week. You're going to be dealing with this for the next decade. You really want to shut the door if you're going to be willing to put in all the effort it takes to reduce the overgrowth. Okay, step number 3 for a lot of people is to improve their diet. And this can be a little bit complicated and can really vary from person to person. But the thing that most people agree upon is that you got to get rid of the sugar and the high carbohydrate foods and all the processed junk, because that seems to feed all these bad guys. All the bacteria and all the yeast really like that sugar, and it helps them thrive. So we need to remove that so that we're not feeding them and giving them like, hey, let's have a fun time, let's have a party. So we need to get rid of this stuff. But here's where it can get a little bit tricky. Because when it comes to bacterial overgrowth, one of the most popular steps to take is to use a carnivore diet, where you're removing all the carbohydrates and you're just having protein and animal fat. And this seems to be very effective for SIbO, for that bacterial overgrowth issue. The problem is, remember, a lot of these people that have this problem in the first place don't have enough stomach acid. And now you're going to put a bunch of protein in there when they don't have the stomach acid to break them down. That's really going to cause some trouble and make them feel pretty lousy, and also not give them any fuel so they can function as a human being. So that's why a lot of people fail on carnivore, because they don't have the digestion set up to break all that meat down. So that's one problem. But here's another bigger problem that most people don't know about. It might freak you out a little bit. A lot of people will also use a ketogenic diet to deal with these types of things. To get rid of the carbs and sugars, that's a good step. We want to do that. But then they're also creating all of these ketones to give their body another fuel source. So this is another benefit of a ketogenic diet. But when it comes to candida and yeast, mold, fungus type issues, they can also thrive on ketones. So I'm going to put a link to some information below from Paul Jaminet, who helped us understand that when these pathogens have a mitochondria like yeast and fungus, they have the ability to feed on ketones. So a lot of people who are using a ketogenic diet, when they're dealing with a yeast, candida, fungal type issue, can really magnify those problems, because they're creating this fuel source for all these bad guys by creating all of these ketones. So he even suggests that, you can just test out going on a ketogenic diet and do your symptoms get a lot worse. If they get a lot worse, then you could be dealing with a candida or yeast fungal type issues. If the symptoms get better, then it's probably more of a bacterial issue, because the bacteria and virus cannot feed on ketones like the yeast and fungus can. So all that can be a little bit complicated, but it's important to understand, I'm going on a ketogenic diet and everything is getting worse. It's important to understand why. What we like to see people do is to reduce all this processed junk, all these foods that are not real food, get rid of all those sugars, high carbs, processed junk. And when you're going to eat some carbohydrates, eat real food sources that have like what we call a medium carb level. Things like sweet potatoes and butternut squash and Brussels sprouts and berries and things like that. Things that can supply you with some carbohydrates enough to keep you out of ketosis, but not so much that you're going to be feeding all these pathogens. And just keep in mind that the level of carbohydrates that a person would need to consume to stay out of ketosis is going to vary greatly from person to person. Some people can eat a couple sweet potatoes and stay in ketosis. So just remember, if there's a yeast or fungal issue, that's a scenario where you really don't want to be in ketosis, because you can magnify that issue. Now, once you get this under control, are ketones bad? No, they might not be so bad in that scenario. So we use ketogenic diets with our clients. We use carnivore diets with our clients, but we don't use it with all of our clients. It's just not right for everybody. There are some scenarios where a person doesn't want to use those type of diets. We'll put a link in the description below for our video on who should not use a ketogenic diet if you need to dig into that a little bit more. And we'll also put some links in the description below to some studies that showed that people saw a lot more improvement when they changed their diet than just using some type of antifungal, either a medication or a natural antimicrobial. They saw better results when they also adjusted their diet. And it was a really big percentage of people that saw better results when they adjusted both. But when they were adjusting the diet, they were just getting rid of the carbs and the sugars and the junk. They weren't necessarily using a carnivore or a ketogenic diet. They were just getting rid of the junk that's really feeding these pathogens. So step number 4 is probiotics. These seem to be very beneficial, and we'll put some links to some studies below that showed that the most effective forms seem to be the Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a yeast form of probiotics. So you can actually improve a yeast problem by putting better forms of yeast in there to help keep them in check. A lacto-bifido blend of bacteria, or the soil-based probiotics. And those seem to be the most effective. But a lot of people like to use these right off the bat, and I just don't like to do that. This is just my opinion, just because I don't like people yelling at me. But if a person has a major overgrowth in here and you're going to put a bunch of good bacteria or good yeast in there, then you're going to create this war between the good guys and the bad guys that can really magnify a lot of those symptoms that they're dealing with. So I like to see people just take things down a few notches. Do some of these other steps that are going to shut the front door, help you break food down, help acidify this environment a little bit so they're not thriving so much, and maybe wipe out a few layers of these bad guys before you start putting in the probiotics. So I feel like the probiotics are very important. I just don't start off with them like a lot of people do. Some of the studies even show that when you start off with the probiotics, people do very well. I just find that I just don't like to deal with the discomfort that they deal with when they go that route. It doesn't happen for everybody, but a lot of people just get a lot of initial discomfort. And also keep in mind that a lot of those symptoms that we talked about in the beginning, all the burping and the bloating and the gas and the constipation, all these things that people deal with are the same types of symptoms that we also see when someone is not making enough stomach acid or their bile is not flowing correctly. So when you can correct these issues as you're taking things down a few notches, you can really improve a lot of symptoms so that when you put the probiotics in, if it creates a bit of a war, the reaction is not going to be as severe. Okay, step number 5 is to simmer down. Remember, we talked about how this stress over here has the ability to downregulate the immune system. So we don't want that. When this stuff is going on, we really want the body to be able to focus on these bad guys that need to be taken care of. So when a person is stressed out, that's a stress to the body. The body doesn't know that you're stressed because you're late for work or that your boss is a jerk or your life is just stressful because of some relationship thing. It views that stress as you're running from a lion. So when you're running from a lion, the body views that stress as this is an emergency. We need to change the whole way that the body is operating so that we can prioritize survival. We need to survive in this next 4 minutes while we're being chased by this lion. In 4 minutes, the lion's going to give up and it's going to be fine, but we're going to change everything that's going on to prioritize surviving. So when a person is stressed for a month, the body has changed the way that it's functioning for a month. So all of those things where maybe the immune system was the priority has changed to this emergency that the body is dealing with. That's why a lot of this immune system gets so downregulated. Another thing to think about beyond just the stress of that is that in this parasympathetic state of the autonomic nervous system is where we digest. We need to be able to move into the parasympathetic state, which is our rest and digest state, for the body to be able to make this hydrochloric acid that keeps all the bad guys out. But if a person is stressed and the body is shoved into the sympathetic fight or flight state, then all these functions are not always going to work correctly. So if you're stressed out, simmer down, figure it out, find out how to reduce the stress in your life. It's that important. Okay, so what's the solution to this Candida SIfO issue? I don't know. I mean, look, that's a lot of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff going on. And the actual steps are really going to vary from person to person. We need to look at which one of these things needs to be most important to us. Maybe a person is not stressed at all. Maybe that's not part of their situation at all. But for most people, it's going to take some work to go through these things and make sure that you're handling all of them. Make sure that all of them are working in your favor to make this a whole lot easier. So since that digestion is such a big priority and shutting that front door is really the biggest deal, jump over right now and check out our video on either 10 signs of low stomach acid or 10 signs of poor bile flow to see if those issues are something that you need to correct. I can't wait to hear about your results.